Hello and welcome everyone to the Grant Writing and Funding Program Information and Workshop Session. We are so glad that you could join us today. My name is Professor Peter Pinar. I am the Executive Director of the Leaders of Africa Institute, and I join you today from our educational studio here at the Leaders of Africa Institute in Chicago, Illinois, in the United States. It is so lovely to be with you today, and we look forward to getting to know a little bit about you and sharing more about the flagship grant writing and funding strategy program for social impact here at the Leaders of Africa Institute. And as we begin today's session, I'm going to hand it over to the co-lead for the grant writing and funding program, as well as the co-host for today's session today, that is Professor Etta Mercy Aki. Over to you, Prof. Etta.
Hello, Prof. Peter. Hello, dear participants. We're excited to have you here today, and welcome to the grant writing and funding information session. I'm Dr. Itabe Siaki. I'm joining you here from Buea, Cameroon. And I would love to know where you're joining us from. So share with us on the chat. I see many people already doing that already. Share with us your name, the city and country you're currently joining us from, as well as your area of interest. What's your area of interest, whether in terms of research or social innovation impact? Are you interested in issues around education, engineering, public health, what have you? So share that with us in the chat so that we can get to know you. All right, I see lots of those shares have come in. There is Ngonge Meiva, who is joining us as well from Cameroon. Hello, Meiva. Are you joining us from Buea, Yaoundé? Where are you joining us from? Nice to meet you. There is also Lawrence Nasize. Lawrence is joining us from Zambia. Hello, Lawrence. Welcome to the call. Share with us your research interest or social innovation interest. And I also see Happiness. Happiness is joining us from Malawi. And Happiness is interested in agricultural economics. Okay, that's nice. Nice to meet you. And there is also, so we see a lot of diversity from different areas. And there is Matthews Mebrate from Ethiopia. Matthews is interested in agricultural extension and is joining particularly from the Ethiopian Institute of Agricultural Research. Quite interesting. Nice to meet you there. Okay, and so please keep those chats coming in. Share with us your name, the city, the country you're currently joining us from, as well as your area of interest. All right, with that, to get us started, I'll pass on back to you, Prof. Peter.
Thank you, Prof. Etta, for beginning our introductions. And I can see that there's a breadth of diversity geographically here. There's a breadth of research and also social impact interests that are represented here. And we're going to be talking about how the grant writing and funding program addresses those needs and those localities as well as we get started. So again, I want to welcome you all to the Grant Writing and Funding Program Information and Workshop Session. And I want to welcome all of you who are joining us today in the Zoom room together, as well as all those who are joining on the auxiliary stream here on YouTube as well. It is great to be with you today. We are here to talk about the flagship grant writing and funding strategy program for social impact, as well as share some insights into the foundations of grant seeking and grant making and grant writing in today's information session. So let us begin. As I mentioned, my name is Professor Peter Pinar. I am the Executive Director of the Leaders of Africa Institute and will be one of the co-leads for the grant writing and funding program this year. It is my pleasure as the Executive Director to welcome scholars in our programs, our flagship programs from over 50 countries across the globes, many of which you see here, including, of course, the African continent, but also across Europe, across the Middle East, Asia, and increasingly in Latin America, and of course, North America, where we are presently based here at the Leaders of Africa Institute. And what brings together scholars in our flagship programs, including the grant writing and funding program, is a belief that research and social innovation can be used to solve some of the major challenges and provide some solutions to those challenges, the major challenges that we face. And there are so many different challenges, including some of the challenges you see on your screen, such as disruptions to food systems, issues surrounding energy and its connection to artificial intelligence, issues surrounding economic uncertainty and management, issues surrounding burdens on public health systems, new vectors for disease and control, climate change, which influences a lot of different areas of development, and of course, educational achievement gaps. These are just 6 of the many different challenges that we face, many of which you've referenced in the chat in regards to your research and professional interests as well. So what unites all those scholars here at the Institute is a belief that research in social innovation can make an impact. And we can see that across our alumni. A couple of the alumni are here today to share about their experience in the program and to present some elements of the Capstone project, which is a core feature of the grant writing and funding program. But just to summarize 4 of our great change makers in resource mobilization who go before you in the grant writing and funding program. We have Dr. Chao, who will actually be speaking a bit later in today's session. She is based in Kenya. She is a computer scientist, and she is an educator who runs the organization Kamilimu, which is a nonprofit that accelerates skills and tech education for Kenyans who are graduating university and who are looking to get a foothold in the tech industry, not just at the basic level, but at the most advanced levels of their computer science and technology craft. We also have Roland Mahdi, who is presently a research associate at the Johns Hopkins University in the United States in the Bloomberg School for Public Health. He was a scholar of the grant writing and funding program, as well as a scholar of the research methods program, focusing on issues surrounding public health and its intersections with nutrition. We're going to hear a little bit about his Capstone project later in today's session as well. We also have Diana Ongare, who from Uganda, who is a grant writing scholar in last year's cohort, who is a fundraising consultant with the Development Network and Panda Capital, working on mobilizing the resources for a lot of the great projects that can enhance research as well as accelerate social innovation. She is also a lecturer in law in her home country of Uganda. And lastly, we have Cynthia. Cynthia was a grant writing scholar in last year's 2025 cohort, and her background is as a program manager in the I Am Swedish Development Partner, where she coordinates multi-country efforts to bring together stakeholders in civil society to improve human rights outcomes. Her specific focus in recent years has been human rights and improving conditions in the mining sectors and extractive industry sectors. These are just 4 of the many alumni who have gone before you in the grant writing and funding program, a couple of which will be sharing their experiences in the program later today. But to situate today's session, as we think about grant writing and funding, it's really important to acknowledge that the landscape when it comes to grant writing and fundraising and resource mobilization is changing. It's changing quickly, and it's changed quite considerably in the last year. If you think back to last year at this time, we saw a new American president who came into power and changed quite a lot when it came to the aid sector and how we think about grant writing, funding, and all these different pieces. Now, some of you may have been affected by the cuts to USAID. Let us know in the chat. Give me a yes, a simple yes in the chat if you were affected in any way by those cuts to USAID. And I would imagine that many of you are actually going to say yes, because you work at some of the foremost NGOs and research organizations across the African continent and globe. So it had a profound impact. And one of the things that it makes us reflect on when it comes to the grant writing and funding space is that it's always important when it comes to our work to justify the fact that we have value in the research and innovation space. Because as we know, and when we see these funding cuts that take place in our space, that research and social innovations requires many resources in terms of its time, in terms of its energy, to be able to carry out the important work that we want to do. And so when funding cuts happen, when the landscape is uncertain, as it still is today, it makes it very difficult to be able to see a long-term time horizon, a pathway forward to fund some of the important projects that we had. Now, many of you throughout your educational experience may have actually had to self-fund some of the work that you have done. Now, one of the things that we realize is some of the major research and innovation does require more than just the self-funding, but it requires real and substantial resources to get our work moving forward. Now, one of the challenges that we face is that our publics that fund our research, our publics that fund our social innovation, as well as the politicians associated with the lawmaking that oftentimes shakes these environments for research mobilizations, oftentimes underestimate the value of research and social innovation work. They talk a lot about the immediate impacts of the work that we have. Now, I can't convince anyone here, because I think we're all on the same page in this session, that we believe that our research work and our social innovation work actually does have an impact that is not only in our publications and works that we share, but also is shaping the livelihoods of the people that we work with. But the thing that we must do as we become resource mobilizers is we need to clearly articulate that value, not only to the panels that will make decisions about our grants, and we're going to be talking about that as we go, but also the publics and the policymakers that govern a lot of the decisions that regard the funding streams that are available to us. And that is at the heart of the grant writing and funding program, is exactly how we do that in this shifting and ever-changing landscape of research mobilization. Now, when it comes to research mobilization, funding comes in all shapes and sizes. Our grant writing scholars last year, many of them have raised in the amounts of $5 million above in previous calls for grants and achievements in their work portfolio. Others amongst the cohort last year received smaller grants, under 10,000 grants or under 5,000 grants. And other scholars in the previous cohort were new to grant writing. In other words, they were finding opportunities that they needed to raise that money for the social impact work they were doing, that research work they were doing. And so they began to raise that funding in the context of the program. So the key point is that grants come and funding comes in all shapes and sizes in this changing landscape. They also come in all different shapes. They come from different actors. Some grants come from NGOs or from governments or from large NGO charities. We can think about many that are out there, such as the Ford Foundation, the Gates Foundation, and the list goes on. There are also new actors in the funding and research mobilization space, including impact investors that are looking to see how research can intersect with actually creating social innovations that grow out of research. And then we have more standard investors or standard investments from actors such as venture capitalists who are really interested in scalable solutions that grow out of research or scalable ideas that grow out of organizations and other initiatives. And of course, we have private and public partnerships as well that take place in the space that shape the funding mobilization landscape as well. So one of the key aspects of the grant writing and funding program, it isn't focused on, say, large grants or small grants. It's focused on all sizes, and it's also focused on all shapes, because in this changing landscape, we have to be quite agile when it comes to the types of funding that we may be able to achieve and gather to be able to move our projects forward. And so we're going to be talking about that in this session. And so as I previewed in this information and workshop session, our scholars who have gone before you in the grant writing program have done the hard work of thinking about how they articulate their value, the work that they're doing to those different audiences to mobilize resources in all shapes and sizes. And we're going to now turn to how the program structures the curriculum to be able to enhance our scholars to do just that, to mobilize those resources. So before I do that, I also want to pass it over to the co-leads for their introductions. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Prof. Edda, to more fully introduce yourself as one of the co-leads for the grant writing and funding program.
One of the key things that has driven my interest in resource mobilization is meeting with the need of purposeful and meaningful learning for my students. And it didn't take long for me to discover that this was resource mobilization was not just a career requirement for advancement and progression, but it was actually one of the areas that will help me build the interventions I'm seeking to build in order to support students. And so far, I've been able to do that in several ways through my work in the University of Boya, where I serve as a vice dean in charge of studies and student affairs, and also my work with the Leaders of Africa Institute. I'm Dr. Etame Aki, an associate professor of educational administration, and my research area is focused on school leadership, on learning, applied learning, and aspirations. And I've been able to mobilize funds through the Yale University to a program, Life Worth Living, where funding was acquired to be able to build a sustainable program that provides meaningful learning for university students. And I've also been able to build interventions to support literacy and resilience development amongst internally displaced children in Cameroon through funding acquired from the Canadian Organization of Development through Education Code. Currently also handling as a collaborator a grant provided by Education Sub-Saharan Africa, ESA, which is focused on building digital animated folktales that will support literacy. All of these works have not just been a given, but they have come from a place of passion focused on wanting to provide support for applied learning through educational initiatives. That's a little about me, and I'm excited to be here. I'm one of the instructors for this program, and I'm looking forward to a very successful program. I will hand over now to Prof. Jelili to introduce himself.
Yeah, thanks so much, Prof. Ita and Prof. Peter. And thanks to the scholars for showing interest in the program. So my name is Prof. Jalili Adebi, otherwise known as Ghana. And I've been part of this program since the beginning of the program. And I'm also one of the co-founders of the Leaders of Africa Institute, where I currently serve as the associate director. My scholarship basically revolves around issues in sustainability. And when I use the word issues in sustainability, it means that my work is not limited to just one aspect of sustainability, because that is the general tendency of folks who are working as scholar practitioner, always limiting themselves to one thing. But my scholarship is all over the place in the area of sustainability. Currently, I'm assembling a team that is going to be investigating the various aspects, institutional, behavioral, organizational, and what have you, that is contributing to the crisis associated with the recycling of lead acid battery in Nigeria and in other African countries, because it became a major scandal towards the end of last year in Nigeria, when a set of international and local journalists investigated the crisis in the sector. So my research revolves around this. And the other part of my research also focuses on behavioral science and in relation to the issue of sustainability. Currently, I've been leading a research that is opening up the global space in the area of nudging for sustainable attitudes. I've been experimenting with nudging, through different experimental setup to figure out how we can actually use nudging to ensure that people, for example, they are recycling their waste properly, to ensure that people are sorting their waste properly. So it's a new brand of research that I'm doing, and I've been using this research to help the state of Michigan here in the United States to develop a plan on how Norway can actually support them to achieve their goal of food waste reduction and proper recycling by 50% in the year 2030. In addition to that, my research also extends to the controversial issues surrounding the massification of solar farms and AI data center. So again, I've been doing research in rural America, exploring all these aspects of artificial intelligence and solar farms that are blooming in the country. And equally, I've done work related to food safety, and one of which actually handed me an invitation to be part of the leading journal in the area of food safety in the United States, the Journal of Food Protection Trends. It's a major industry journal in the country. And I've done a couple of work leveraging the concept of branding as a means of understanding the hesitancy otherwise of different stakeholders to go with government developed food safety schemes. And my other aspect of scholarship, obviously, is looking at the intersection of the issue of religion with development, because my scholarship seeks to push boundaries. I have a lot of concerns with the way the Western world, look at issues, and we are beginning to see a lot of contradiction associated with the Western informed development paradigm. So I've been doing some work of recent looking at alternative approach to constructing the concept of development, especially focusing on the religions of Islam, looking at what it brings to the table in terms of helping us to crystallize what I call a moral development system that is going to address to the profundity of the challenges affecting us today. So thank you so much for your interest in the program. And I believe if you are successful making it to this program, it's going to be one of the most impactful things you have ever been involved in. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Ghana, for your remarks and sharing about your research agenda. I also will mention that I also am a researcher like those of my colleagues here. My focus is on political science, democracy and elections, and political participation, and the role that public policy has in public service delivery, such as in the areas of procuring electricity or procuring public health, for instance. I'm also somebody that focuses a lot on data science and data analytics as well. We are also happy to have on the grant writing and funding program team Dr. Melissa Washington Norte, who's based at King's College in London. Her background is in educational psychology and specifically early childhood education. She's part of the SPARK project, that is a funded project to build capacity in those areas. And she is also part of the grant writing and funding team. So you can see the grant writing and funding team is ones that are stationed, as Prof. Ghana and myself are, in our home base at the Institute here in the United States, but also in the United Kingdom and, of course, on the African continent as well. And so let us move into our next introductions. Very briefly, I'm going to call on Dr. Chao Mbogho and Lydia Eloff to very briefly introduce themselves. They're going to talk a little bit more about their work later in today's session, but we wanted to give the opportunity to introduce themselves at this time. So Dr. Chao, I see you are there. Feel free to introduce yourself.
Okay. All right. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the info session. I'll be back with a much more fuller presentation in a bit, but my name is Dr. Chao, and I come from Kenya. I am a computer scientist, and I'm one of the alumni for last year's grant writing fellowship, and I'm excited to be sharing about a bit more about that and my experience in a little while. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chao. And Lydia?
Hello, everybody. We're experiencing some rain showers, so I really hope I don't drop. So I'm just gonna turn my, I'll just turn my camera off in case. So my name is Lydia Eloff, and I was part of the 2025 grant writing and funding cohort. And my area of interest is public health, but from a lab perspective. So I'm a postgraduate research fellow at the University of Namibia, working closely with the Ministry of Health and Social Services I work on malaria research, generating evidence-based data that can be used for informed decision-making. So this includes speciating the different species found in transmission hotspots, surveillance of drug resistance markers, and I'll expand on this during the Capstone project session, and also assessing efficacy of diagnostic tools. So we use rapid diagnostic tests for malaria diagnosis. So it's important that we ensure that our treatments and our diagnostic tools are effective. So the research that we do at UNAM has impact because it contributes to decision-making. So it's important that we mobilize sustainable funding for research to ensure that our treatment and diagnostic tools are effective. And if not, we can find better ways for treating our people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lydia. And again, as Lydia and Dr. Chao have mentioned, they're going to be sharing a little bit more about their capstone projects, because one of the core features of the grant writing funding program is not just discussing grant writing, but actually writing a full proposal to advance the resource mobilization efforts that they have. But we're going to get to that later in today's session. We're now going to turn it over to Prof. Etta, who's going to preview the curriculum for the grant writing and funding program. And then we're going to be talking about some of these particular aspects of that curriculum in more detail as we begin that section of today's program. So over to you, Prof. Etta.
So far, we have seen that there's a diverse landscape of resource needs, of funding needs, whether coming from the pure sciences or the social sciences or from education like myself and broader humanities. There is always need for funding to create the necessary impact that we want to create through the kinds of research and social innovation projects that we are involved in. And this is why we created a power curriculum. We call it a proposal to power curriculum, PPC. The funding landscape is quite competitive. In fact, the last grant I got, there were 853 applicants, and they were looking for 20 successful applications. So you can imagine that in this tight competition, there is a necessity to have a required skill set to be able to win these calls, to be able to win these funding opportunities. And so through this curriculum in the grant writing and funding program, we dwell on accessing funding opportunities. If you do not even get access to the funding opportunities, then it becomes very difficult for you to even put a proposal that will compete. And at this very initial stage, people begin to get a lot of trouble. People get knocked out already because they do not know where the grants are coming from. They do not have any information about that. And so this is a key thing that is at the core of our curriculum. And then we also deal with crafting funding proposals. This is quite critical because, as we indicated already, as we alluded to, those funding proposals go into a pool of competitive, strong proposals. And so it's so important that you are able to craft a proposal that will stand out. And then budgeting, of course, is quite critical. It's at the center of that whole writing process, the process of developing your proposal. But not just the budget. In this curriculum, we focus more on a transparent budget. How do we develop one? How do we ensure that the budget is meeting the needs, the proposed budget is meeting the needs of the funders? And we also deal with the research writing and communication. And we're going to talk about each of these aspects in greater depth. So we also deal with research writing and communication, which is quite important because sometimes one may be talking about the solar panels and all the mathematical modeling and all the fine ideas that you can bring forth, but we can relate with those ideas as reviewers. Then it's just safer to take off your proposal from the many that have come in. And so communicating effectively to the funders is equally a core language. It has its own language, and that has to be learned. And we'll also deal with engagement with funding stakeholders. How do you engage with them? Because you have your own vision, the funders have their own vision, the targeted audience equally have their own vision. How do you marry all of these visions together? That equally is a skill set that has to be learned. Specifically, the program offers a personal mentorship. So beyond the curriculum, we also, as part of the curriculum, we also offer personal mentorship that allows the scholar to be able to build a proposal from scratch. And so I'm going to pass on to Prof. Jelili Ghana, who is going to take us in depth about these aspects of our proposal to power curriculum.
So part of what we have for you to be able to do an excellent job to secure grants is that to build your capability to be able to decide the particular grant you're going to apply to. Many times when people apply for grants, they are not applying for grants that they are going to be considered a potential fundable candidate. And that means that starting the wrong way. So starting the right way is a requirement for your grant application to be funded. So we are going to help fortify, reinforce your capability to be able to make the right decision when it comes to doing this. And what that means is that we are going to be sharing with you the decision-making tools that will guide you through this process. And the other part of it is that understanding is critical. Because one of the ways that we assess whether something is fundable or not is when the grant applicants, they demonstrate a good understanding of the vision of that particular grant, the objective of the grant, and its particulars that are expected to be attended to in their grant application. Without being able to do all of these things, what that means is that the grant is not even going to get to the reviewer. It's just the secretary who is not going to be a grant expert that is going to dispatch it into the dustbin. So many grant applications don't actually make it to the review desk. Why? Because they demonstrate a lack of basic understanding of what the grant solicitation is all about. And now we are beginning to get to a situation in our world that specialized platforms are being created for almost everything you can imagine. The same thing applies to grant application. So there are specialized platforms that are being created and dedicated solely for the purposes of grant. Some are customized, some are more general. And we'll use the word customized. For example, if you're working on issues related to public health, there are certain grant application platforms that are intended and directed towards people within that ecosystem. And the same thing applies to folks in different professional and career ecosystem. And finally, we're also going to be building our ability to compare and contrast different potential funding mechanisms and options, because it's part of the decision that needs to be made. Because every single time you make a resolve to apply for a particular grant, what you're actually doing is that you are taking a decision that comes with alternative forgone. Because you make a decision to apply for one particular grant, it means that you're investing your time into that grant application, forgoing on that grant application. What that means is that you need to make the right choice, because you need to make a good use of your time. You need to make a good use of your intellect, especially pivoting you towards the likelihood of being funded for this particular grant application. So what that means is that there are necessary steps, initial steps, that need to be taken as a precondition for a successful grant application. If those necessary steps were taken or decisions were not taken carefully, chances are that your grant applications are not going to be funded. So we are going to be building your critical capacity to be able to do the right thing in these early pre-application necessary decision steps. And the other thing that we are also going to be talking about is, the issue of expectation. There's a lot that goes into expectation. And there are many tools that you can actually use to understand what the expectations are. And now people are beginning to make use of artificial intelligence tools, all kinds of artificial intelligence tools, as a means of, motivating the process of writing their grant application. And a good number of the folks who are using AI, they've been using it the wrong way, and it's been leading to reasons why their grants are not being funded. because many of the grantees, they have AI detection softwares that immediately detect whether AI was used to generate the narrative or to write up a significant part of the grant. And that is why one of the things we are going to be talking about is how you can actually use AI in the Socratic sense, because there are various uses of AI that are problematic. And there are some uses of AI that can assist you to actually do a better job putting together a compelling grant application. So through this program, we are going to be reinforcing your capability to use AI as a tool, as a supporting Socratic tool. And I want us to pay attention to the word Socratic tool that support your grant application in ways and manner that will assist you to identify the gaps that need to be addressed when putting your grant application together. And we are also going to be teaching you how AI can be instrumented as a form of peer reviewer. That is that thing that gives you the opportunity to assess the gap, the opportunity for you to take your grant to the next level without taking over the grant application writing process. Because once you're able to use AI in that way, what that means is that the chances for funding your grant application is going to increase significantly. However, when you use AI irresponsibly, what you're trying to tell the grantees is that you don't have time for their research. You are not going to create time to be able to do the job. That's the meaning. And they understand that that means you are not worthy of being funded. And that is why it's important for us to build this critical capability. And the other thing is that proposals come in different structures. Some of the structures are clearly elucidated in the grant application request. Some are vaguely, elucidated, and some are not even elucidated at all. So how do you go about making the right decision call when you deal with vaguely elucidated grant proposal structure and those that even do not even do anything in this area? You require certain skill set and experiential exposure for you to be able to do the right thing. So we're going to be addressing this issue, through this program. And finally, we are going to be talking about expectations, assessment of criteria, and how you can use that as a pre-writing preparation tool, and as you can also use that as a guardrail to ensure that your grant proposal is actually falling in pace. So there are technicalities that needs a lot of attention, that needs a lot of skill building, that requires a lot of ability to be able to use several tools out there in order for you to write a compelling grant application that is going to be funded. All of those are part of the package for those of you that, make it to this highly competitive program.
Indeed, and just building off what Prof. Ghana mentioned, one of the key themes here, and we're going to see in our workshop session of today, is thinking like a reviewer. When you write your grants, we oftentimes think about ourselves as writing as the grant seeker, but we have to be writing as if we are in the positionality of the people who will actually interact with the grant proposal at the forefront. And so imagine if they're getting all of these proposals that have been written by an AI engine, the same AI engine oftentimes, how they sound. I'm sure many of you, when you read something that has been written by AI, you can detect that. Well, the reviewers can as well. And we know that this changing landscape in grant making is intersecting with artificial intelligence and these tools that we're using, but we have to be knowing how to use them wisely in a way that helps us respond to the needs of the reviewers, and putting ourselves in the place of the reviewer, in the reviewer's mindset, helps us get in that position we need to be able to craft that funding proposal. To you, Prof. Etta.
So this means that that whole process of building a good proposal requires that you are effective in assessing these funding opportunities and also crafting funding proposals. But what is it for you? Are these the most difficult areas in that process? Why don't you share with us on the chat? What is the most difficult thing for you when it comes to grant writing, making applications for putting out a proposal? What's the most difficult thing for you? Is it accessing these opportunities or crafting funding proposals? Or what other areas come to mind? What is it for you? I'm currently checking the chat to see what is coming in. Okay, so I see budgeting, proposal writing, using AI ethically, articulating the proposals, grammar. Okay, a lot of diversity there in terms of needs. And I always say, if Prof. Peter could do the Zoom mathematics, then you'll be able to tell us which one has the highest counts. Okay, so I see there are several areas, but I also see one important area, which is actually the budget. How do we do a transparent budget? Already in the chat, I saw Emmanuel raise the question of what is a realistic budget? And we say here to note, firstly, that we must build realistic budgets that are comprehensive. And I tend to look at budgets like a market list. So imagine that you have maybe 100 USD for shopping, and then you are making a list that is going to cover 500 USD. What's that? Realistic or not realistic? And so we can begin from this very initial basis to begin to think about what a realistic budget is. If you think again about it like a market list, then you know when you think about your market list, you have the items, you have the amounts that align to these items, but you don't just place amounts there, based on your own whims, but you place those amounts based on certain needs, and you even have justifications as to why you're giving this item, this amount, and not the other. And so building a realistic budget and a transparent one requires that you are justifying every budgetary item that has been indicated. And it's a whole work to be able to identify what items to begin with are necessary for you to realize the impact of that project, and then what specific amounts or budgets will be able to be allocated to that item. So that's so important. And as we think about transparent budgets, we also draw the attention of our scholars to the fact that there are certain needs and expectations that the funder has. And there are also needs and expectations that the grantee equally has, you who is writing the proposal. And there are also needs and expectations that needs to be realized in terms of the impact that you want to create. And all of these visions, all of these needs, all of these expectations must come together for you to be able to draw a budget that satisfies the needs, the expectations of the funders, yours, and that of your intended audience. So it's important to align that cost to meet the funders' expectations. And we must do it in a way that we are maximizing that funding for impact. And already here, I will always insist that grant money is not for business. It's not free money. So these are taxes that sometimes it comes from taxes that people have paid and want to be able to see certain kinds of advancements in different development spaces. And so it's important to think about how the funding in terms of the budget, in terms of the budget that you are making, will be able to realize the necessary impact. How will you strategize to ensure that these resources will be allocated in a way that will realize this impact, and even in a way that is sustainable? Remember that Prof. Peter alluded to the US aid cuts, and many of us did agree. I also was affected by this cut, and many of us agreed that these funding cuts affected them. So that means that those areas where we actually advocate for, those areas where we want to be able to realize impact, will just be cut short if the funding ceases. And so we must think about beyond the funding. We must think about ways in which that impact will continue to scale it or go in depth as even if we do not have our funders present. And so that means that we must think sustainably. And these are all the issues that goes into a transparent budget. And so budgeting is not just mathematics. It's a lot of thought. It's a deep understanding about your area of interest and the proposal and even the people and the areas that you'll be working with. So this is a lot, but there is also research writing. And for this, I'm going to turn on back to Prof. Peter to tell us much more about research writing and communication.
Indeed. One of the key parts of a transparent budget is the ability to communicate transparently to the reviewers and to the audience for the proposal, the work that you're doing and why these pieces that you're mentioning that are necessary to carrying out the work are in fact necessary. And we have to do that through a very strong clarity in the ways that we write. And I think this is one of the mistakes that many people make when it comes to budgeting, is they oftentimes do not budget very carefully. They do not use the terminology that will be very inclusive and very clear as to what everything is needed as part of it. And that's because part of grant writing is a form of communication and communication strategy. So it's really important these days when it comes to that we make sure that we're making our research writing and our communication and proposal inclusive of the broad group of reviewers and individuals that will come across our grant. So the first thing I'll mention is that these days, a lot of our grants and funding opportunities involve not only communicating the depth of the work that we're doing, but also emphasizing the social impact that it will have. Because a lot of foundations and funders are saying, well, this research is a really good and important research, but we as an institution that's funding this want to be able to boast or talk about the projects that we fund in relation to how they're making a difference in people's lives. So one of the first steps of research communication and communication in the context of a grant proposal is being able to speak to the social impact work that we do. Now, some of us are going to be very good at that because we think about things in terms of the social impact that we're having. And in fact, some of our research is really attuned to social impact, whereas some of us are more on the lab side of things, or perhaps more sort of doing internal research. And so it may be a little bit more challenging to communicate that social impact. But it's an important feature these days of our grants and the writing that we need to do. The second key thing, and I think this underlies the type of writing that we do need to do, is that our grant proposals, our funding proposals, are going to be shared with people who are both experts and non-experts, and some folks who are experts in a general area but may not be a specific expert in the specific area that you're working on or the specific method that you're working on. And so we have to be cognizant of that, because the mistakes that people make is oftentimes they write as if they're writing to a peer who does exactly the work that they do or knows all the aspects of the work that they do, whereas the broad panel that is making the assessment of the grant is much broader and has some experts and non-experts alike. So how do we think about how we write that grant to be able to appeal to those diverse sets of reviewers that will be looking at it? And that also makes us think about how we make a case that is going to be compelling, concise, and impactful. Because again, coming back to this theme of thinking like a reviewer, you can think about how much time and energy that a reviewer puts into reviewing all of these different proposals that will eventually land on their desk, right? Because obviously there are different review processes. First, there's a screening process. Then oftentimes there's a second screening process. And then finally, it goes out to reviewers who are going to more seriously score and consider those grants. So how do we make sure that we're writing grants that are going to be respecting the time and energies of that team that are going to review our grants? Well, we talked about the intersection with the use of AI already in today's session. We also have to think about how we write in a concise way that is going to get our message across in an inclusive way that is going to get straight to the heart of what we're doing without dancing around other issues or sidetracking the focus of what we're trying to do. And so we have to write in a way that is going to be very disciplined, very concise, and structured effectively, even if, as Prof. Ghana mentioned, the grant opportunity doesn't provide us much structure in how we're going to be able to write that grant. And the final area that we focus on in the grant writing and funding program is the engagement with funding stakeholders. Now, one of the laws of grant writing is that those who get funding in the past are more likely to get funding in the future. So in other words, once you get your foot in the door when it comes to grant writing and resource mobilization, the likelihood of you securing more funding, assuming of course you've done what you needed to do with those funds in the past, is higher than those of us that may be starting off for the first time mobilizing resources. So that really emphasized the fact that credibility when it comes to our relationships with our stakeholders is really important, as well as the relationships that we forge. And one of the key parts of the grant writing funding program is coming up with a stakeholder engagement strategy and the intricacies of that to be able to engage with stakeholders during and before we write our grant proposals. And this means about how we build those networks that are built on our existing and past collaborations, and how we might collaborate in small ways to open ourselves up for collaboration in larger ways for larger grants in the future, and how we reach out to our stakeholders in ways that are more likely to get them to engage with us. Because if somebody has already engaged with us or our team that is writing that funding proposal in advance of a call for that proposal, the likelihood that our proposal is going to go to the review stage or perhaps even succeed in that process is going to be a lot higher. And a lot of times folks think about putting together a proposal as just the document they put together, but they don't have the plan for engagement that really is going to move that actual proposal to the top of the stack of those competitive profiles. And we can talk all day about that, but that is a really core element of the grant writing and funding program. So as I summarize these key features of the grant writing funding program, and we begin to turn to the structure of the program, as well as the Capstone project component of the program, it's really important that the way in which the grant writing and funding program is structured is it has this academic element to what we do here at the Leaders of Africa Institute and in the GWF. It also has elements of a skills bootcamp because we're actually learning how to do specific technical skills when it comes to grant writing, and increasingly the use of certain specialized technical platforms to aid in our grant writing journey. But it also has this other element of being a bit of a think tank, because as we see amongst our scholars in the grant writing and funding program, they're bringing together some really fascinating ideas for research, fascinating ideas for social innovation. And so it becomes a space to discuss and improve those ideas and refine those ideas such that they'll be ready to share in the context of a grant or funding proposal. It is also accelerator to help support the fundraising capacity and opportunities that the scholars have in the program. And of course, amongst the cohort and amongst those who are program directors and involved in the mentorship, it is a supportive community. Because one thing that you will know about resource mobilization is that at times it can be a very dark and sometimes lonely process, particularly the fact that we don't always win the funding proposal cycles that we would like to win. Rejection is part of the grant writing and funding process. But with a supportive community as part of the grant writing and funding program, we find ways to move our work forward, to collaborate, and to ensure that we are able to continue with our efforts despite some of the headwinds that can sometimes happen when it comes to mobilizing resources. And so with that, I'm gonna pass it over to Prof. Etta again to talk a little bit more about the structure and begin to get us into the requirements for the program so you have an understanding of that as well. Back to you, Prof. Etta.
So it's an accelerator program, a university course, and so on. As Peter has already mentioned, our core curriculum and program meetings are scheduled for Sundays. So Sundays in April through June at 2 p.m. UTC. So for my Cameroonian folks, that will be 3 p.m. and Nigerian folks as well. That will be 3 p.m. our time. So you can always convert that to your local time to have the right timing. And of course, they always remind us to get you there. So there's no way you can miss that. It comes at the time during the week when we are taking some kind of rest, because most of the people who get into our programs usually are busy people with different from different walks of life and who are doing one thing or the other. So it's kind of professional training that comes at that time when you can write. So you're resting while learning. And it's imbibed in in a form of assessment that we call creator track, helping us to provide personalized feedback and mentorship to individuals. So it's highly individualized because the program is formed around the core needs of the scholars. And so we meet you at your point of need. And that's why, as some of our alumni will be sharing already, when we do our mentorship and programming, we take into consideration where you are and the kinds of support that you need to be able to give you the right mentor. And there is also an opportunity for international funding showcase and awards. This is where some of our scholars here have won those awards. And this is where the opportunity where you get to share your work with a wider audience. So beyond the different diverse teams who make up your peers in the program, during such programs, we have our partners and many more people who come in to be able to share, to be able to get an understanding of what our scholars are doing. And so during this opportunity, they share their capstone projects, which are usually a good-to-go proposal already, or again, very rigorous, robust ideas that they've come up with. And so these kinds of opportunities may lead you to already gaining some kind of funding, or again, the required collaboration that is needed for a grant. Sometimes grant calls require that you actually build a team, and team building in itself is hard work. And so these opportunities lead you to that. And so what are the requirements for completion of this program? We have basically the research profile project and the capstone project that Prof. Peter is going to talk to us about. But for the research profile project, it includes you reconsidering your curriculum vitae. So when we talk about the funding, you may have a wonderful proposal, you may have a transparent budget, but sometimes funders also need to trust who you are. They need to know that you have the required skill set to do the work that you have done. Yes, it might be difficult to get your first grant. And sometimes when you get it, it may open the channels for more grants. Well, it's really not the rule of the thumb per se. It's not written on stone, because getting every grant is difficult, even if you've had 15 before that. So that credibility, it's so important because it validates the kinds of work that you've done. Even if you've published in that area, for instance, or done some work in that area that you're applying to, that is quite critical. And so that means that you should be able to build a CV that speaks to that credibility, that validates you as a researcher or some project manager in that area. So in this particular requirement, we call on our scholars to be able to reconsider that CV and also craft an online presence with a professional website. This is so important. I think most of us have a traditional CV, what I usually call a paper-based CV. And that paper-based CV, sometimes it's maximum about 4 pages. And when you even do grants, they will ask you for about a two-page CV. How much can you put in there? You do not have the opportunity to put in all the pictures where you had some wonderful field work when you were in the lab, and so on and so forth. Those ideas in those papers that you have published. This is where your online presence begins to count. And so, yes, as a resource, as those interested in resource mobilization, we are also advocates. We also must be able to tell our stories. We must be able to also be able to craft our own stories. We also must be able to blog and so on, but not necessarily as others do it out there, in different social spaces, but in the form of advocacy, because when you come up with realized results, you want to be able to share those results and make meaning out of them. And so in this particular requirement, we consider that, and that means that you have an opportunity to be able to develop your individual professional website, where just at one search, one can be able to tell how much you've done and your skill set in that particular area. It also helps to be able to, it also enables you to be able to articulate your professional capacity. Many of us have done a lot of things, trust me. I was just in an interview the other day, again with Prof. Peter, and there was one of us who had done a lot, but sometimes it might become a problem for you to bring all that you've done in the last 14 years together to put yourself out there. So this requirement helps you to be able to articulate that professional capacity. And so this means that the program is not theoretically based, but it's practical, because you are able to showcase that you have a CV that has been updated. You have been able to build some kind of online presence, as well as be able to show some professional insight. There is also the Capstone project. And Prof. Peter, why don't you take us on that?
And the one thing I'll say in relation to what Prof. Etta mentioned is that funders invest in ideas and they invest in people, right? Exactly. So the Research Profile Project is an opportunity for you to enhance the person or the team that they will be investing in when it comes to their funding. The other part is the idea and how you communicate that idea. But both parts need to be brought together, because when funders are going to be looking at your funding application, they're going to search you. Once you get to that final project, they're going to be searching you. They're going to try to understand who this person is, what they've done. Do they have other artifacts of the work they've done, as Prof. Etta alluded to? So again, funders invest in people as well as the ideas that they're seeking to fund. And I think that's an important part. So let's talk about the ideas part, which is embodied by the capstone. And to answer a question that has been shared, of course, yes, those who finish the grant writing and funding program are issued with an official certificate from the Leaders of Africa Institute. But what's more than a official certificate, and what is the focus of this program, is to accelerate the grant writing work that the scholars are doing in their respective space. And that's what we see with the Capstone project. The Capstone project is begun at the very beginning of the program, where scholars select a specific funding opportunity or propose a theme for future funding opportunity, and then they confirm it with their mentor. So the first step is they decide on an opportunity that they're going to apply to, or a general theme, so that they're able to craft a more general proposal that can be tailored later for opportunities. The second part of that is they craft a pitch presentation for their proposal to get them strong in terms of how they articulate in simple ways the works that they're doing. So this enhances the ability to be able to write eventually that proposal in a convincing and concise way, is how we practice articulating it to a variety of different audiences. Then throughout the program, scholars are going to craft multiple drafts of their funding proposal and receive feedback in a way that will iteratively improve that proposal throughout the context of the program. And then finally, it is optional but very strongly encouraged that the scholars interact with funding stakeholders in their space and eventually will share their funding proposals. Many of our grant writing and funding scholars from the last cohort have already submitted their grants to different opportunities during the program or thereafter the program, and the Institute continues to meet with our grant writing and funding scholars from previous cohorts to encourage them to keep up the efforts of that mobilization and the use of their Capstone project for mobilizing those resources. So, for instance, we can think of a typical scholar. Meet Abigail. So she selects a funding proposal from a major international NGO, for instance, in the areas of climate justice. Then she uses one of the funding templates that is here at the Institute to craft a funding proposal to, say, mitigate climate change in Migori County in Kenya. She produces a pitch for the work that she's doing, as well as a proposal to go along with it. And then she has those key elements that she's ready to go out there and mobilize those resources alongside the supportive community at the Leaders of Africa Institute. But let's talk about some of our grant writing scholars today. And I'm going to now pass the mic over to Dr. Chao, who's with us today, who's going to share a little bit more about her capstone project. And we can just see the first couple paragraphs of her proposal that are here, as well as the website for her organization, Kamilimo, which she was designing a project that was both research-based, but also one that was programmatically or initiative-based as well. So let's hear about that. I'll pass the mic as well as the presentation over to you, Dr. Chao, to share.
All right, I'm going to take about 5 or so minutes, but I wanted to take a step back and just share very, very briefly and quickly about my overall experience so that you can feel more encouraged for those of you who are considering applying. So Prof. Peter has mentioned the certificate, and this is a glimpse of a certificate that you get at the end once you finish the program. So hopefully this is also an additional motivation for you to apply. So I already introduced myself, but I wanted to just also add that besides being a computer scientist, I work at Mozilla Foundation, as well as being a founder of Kamilimo. And please take my website details and you can look at it later so that you can learn more about my background. And I'm based in Nairobi, Kenya. And so the reason why I applied for the Grant Writing Fellowship was to really formalize and upgrade skills that I'd already acquired through experience in different ways of applying for some funding. I also really wanted to strengthen specific skills. So I've seen some of you in the chat, you've talked about budgeting, and that was also a skill I wanted to strengthen, as well as social impact positioning. And I also wanted to scale the funding for my already existing work. So I already had an existing impact and social work, which I really wanted to scale the funding for, because I'd already received some initial funding in different aspects. And at my work at Mozilla, I also wanted to contribute to the fundraising efforts there, which is something I'm now actively doing, and obviously just to learn from other people. So those are the reasons why I applied for the Grant Writing Fellowship, and I think I can, a lot of you in the chat have actually aligned the same. So I wanted to just give you an overview of what stood out for me throughout the time for the Grant Writing Workshop, the fellowship. So there's a personal statement, which I remember applying for, and I think that for me was very important because it gave me a chance to really reflect on why I wanted to apply for the opportunity. I was particularly impressed by the depth of the lessons that you've probably had a brief about from the professors today. There's personalized mentor support, which has already been mentioned. And there's also generally accountability systems that I found very important, especially as someone who likes to know where I'm at in what I engage in. So there's different ways that these accountability systems, from a digital notebook to peer review that you've also heard of, and of course the Capstone project and the global showcase. So in summary, those are the things that really stood out for me throughout the time that I was part of the workshop. And so to give you just a very, very quick tip on how to write the personal statement, which is some of the models I used, is just to lead with a positioning paragraph. So basically, what are you currently doing? And then be honest about your limits, because some of you, as I've seen in the chat, already come with some grant writing experience. So what are some of the limits that you currently still have, or areas you have not explored that you think this workshop, this fellowship will benefit, will add to? And also just being clear and specific on how the fellowship could impact your current and future work. So these are very quick 3 summaries that you could consider when you're writing your personal statement as part of the application. So let me move now to the Capstone process. So you've already had a brief about the Capstone project, and I'll give a very quick overview because I can't really get into the whole project right now. But I used, basically there were 4 steps that I went through in designing the Capstone project to the current status of the funding proposal that I can now reuse to apply to different opportunities. So there was a proposal writing with the idea. So like I mentioned, because I already had work that was ongoing, I now took time to reflect on how I want to scale that work. So the novelty of my proposal idea was now the scaling part, and obviously building on what we've already done. There was also now the full capstone project after the initial proposal writing, which gets peer reviewed by both one of the professors as well as a peer as one of the scholars as well. You get to write the full capstone project, which then leads to the capstone documentation, and then you get a chance to showcase at the global showcase, should you be selected for that. So these are the four main steps that ideally I went through the capstone project, and I'm going to highlight very briefly what was in each. So the first part was problem definition and statement, and I'm going to give a very funnel. So you can see that I have like a funnel model here, which is really how I craft problem definition and statement. So starting from the extent of youth in tech at universities in Kenya and also Africa, looking at the holistic skills gap, especially in computing curricula, which is the area that I am interested in. And then looking at the existing areas, that the existing practices that are already there, because there are already existing solutions that are trying to address this issue, but then narrowing down on what exactly are we actually interested in which case is the lack of consistent mentorship and also scarcity of out-of-classroom models that could sustain or could contribute to this gap. And then lastly, justifying that with data that we had already collected on the extent of this problem. So I used a funnel shape here to just show that this is one way that you can think about a problem, because you might not necessarily be able to solve the large problem, but you can definitely narrow down to a specific problem that then your idea could be about. So after doing this, we wrote a proposal that was then peer reviewed. And after that step, then we moved to the full capstone project. So this is where now I combined both the problem definition as well as the solution approach. And as an overview of what the solution approach for my particular work is that now to solve that lack of out-of-classroom mentorship for computing students specifically, we are now designing a mentorship infrastructure that is an 8-month model and for computing students. Note that I'm using the word mentorship infrastructure and not mentorship classes or mentorship lessons, because we are not looking at simply providing classes, but it's a whole ecosystem that is the solution. And the reason for doing this is threefold: to nurture employability, to grow responsible innovators, and to enhance academic outcomes. Again, it is possible to narrow down to the very specific goals of your idea if you are really able to narrow down the problem to a very specific area. Otherwise, then your goals become too broad to achieve. So the second part of the capstone was now building on a full capstone project, which then led to documentation. So this is just an overview of my table of contents from my capstone project. So one of the things that we needed to do is to choose either research or social impact. So I opted to go with both. And this is not an obligation. You can do either or. But I opted to go with both because I already had done some significant research and actually published on the work that I was doing. So I used that as an opportunity to now use the new skills that I'd learned from the grant writing workshop to combine that with the social impact aspect. So that is why I did both. And as you can see, just from the overview of the write-up, I covered everything from the introduction, which is the problem part, to what has been done so far, to the research plan, which you've heard about in terms of research writing and communicating, to the significance of the study. So this is where now we are starting to see the social impact aspect and obviously the sustainability model as well. So this is an overview of what the whole capstone projects look like on my side, just if you are getting the snapshot from the table of contents. And then from there, the last part was the showcase presentation. So I participated in the global showcase where we delivered 3-minute virtual presentations. And as you can imagine, you have to really communicate a 15 to plus page capstone. And my capstone project was about 40 pages long because I did both research and social impact. And I needed to communicate that in just 3 minutes. And so the skills that I used to do that were just generally the belief in your work, because that always shows internalization as opposed to cramming of the content, brevity on the slides, and storytelling, which you've been also told about, is really, really important. So I used persona showcase as opposed to just having numbers. I actually brought in personas from the people that I'd already worked with, and of course, really practiced a lot. Because 3 minutes is just as important as if you are giving a presentation for 15 minutes. So this is an overview of really how the entire showcase experience, the Capstone experience was for me, right from proposal writing to the showcase presentation. And all that ended up in being honored with 3 awards at the end. So I did win the Audience First Awards, as well as the Education and Empowerment Award and the Best Proposal Award as one of the 2 people who won that. So I'm hoping that some of you in the room will also get to win those at the end. So I'm mentioning these awards, obviously they're really important, but one of the things that I'm using this opportunity is it's now part of my CV, and I'm able to talk about it in my funding pitches or even where I'm presenting that work. So with all that, I hope that we'll be able to see you applying for the 2026 GWF experience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chao. And again, congratulations on those awards, including one of the award winners, as you saw, for the best proposal of the entire cohort from 2026, but also that a special award in the name of one of the late members of the Association of African Universities, one of the supporting institutions of the Institute, that was honored for her second award, which focused on those who are doing work in education. Now, couple questions came up during Dr. Chao's segment here, and we invite you to ask her questions in the chat. She'll be around to answer those, but I'll answer a couple right now in relation to that. One of the questions was, is it okay if you're not a researcher, but rather are thinking about things in terms of your social innovation or growing an initiative or growing an organization? There are 2 main groups within the cohort. One group is those who are working on funding research, and then there's another segment of the cohort that are focused on enhancing initiatives, NGO work, or institutional type grants. So yes, it is okay if you find yourself not in the research space, but in the development space broadly, but focusing on building initiatives. And I think Dr. Chao's project straddles both. It had a research component to it, which helped us understand the effectiveness of these training approaches and understanding how that works or doesn't work for students, but it also had an institutional building component to it as well. So I want to answer that as well. Another question came across, and we'll talk about this more in a bit, which is eligibility to apply for the program. Eligibility is not based on your location, so you can apply from no matter where you are. Any geographical location is open for the application process, as well as any age or any gender. That is, there are no restrictions on that in this program. And one of the reasons why is because we value the geographical diversity that is present in the context of a cohort here at the Leaders of Africa Institute. And that diversity is both geographic in nature, so it allows us to share different experiences across different boundaries and have a more global perspective on the work we do. But we also don't have age restrictions, because that allows our cohort to be diverse in terms of age. So you'll have some people who are in their middle age, some people are older or more experienced that are involved in that cohort. And that allows us to have intergenerational community as part of the grant writing and funding program. As for educational attainment, there are no expectations for your level of education. Obviously, higher levels of education may make you more competitive for the acceptance to the program. So that's something that is there. But one of the things that we'll be talking about a bit later in just a moment, actually, in our session is that even if you are not accepted to the full grant writing and funding program, a number of you that do apply will be accepted to smaller workshops that are available here at the Institute, including fully funded, that you'll be able to participate in hopes that you'll be prepared for the full grant writing and funding program for a future cohort. So I'll talk a little bit more about that as well, because we believe that our admissions process here at the Institute is more about providing you with the right opportunity at the right time for where you are in your career, rather than excluding some folks from applying or not applying at the state of the application process. So that's important to mention here. Yes, you may apply for 2 programs as well, 2 of the flagship programs. In fact, many scholars are involved with more than one flagship program here at the Institute, because once you are accepted to one of the programs, it gives you a little bit of a better chance of being accepted to another program here at the Institute. But we're going to talk more about that later. Dr. Chao, why don't you share your contact information, your website address as well? So we talked about portfolio websites in the chat as we move on. Lydia, I'm going to pass it over to you to share. So I welcome you to unmute yourself. And if your camera is working and your internet's okay, you can turn on your camera. If not, we understand their bandwidth may be a little bit low today, given our size of our session as well. We cannot see your screen yet. Let me pull down this screen so that we can see your screen. There we go. We can see your screen now.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Prof. Pinar, for the opportunity. Hello again. My name is Lydia Eloff, and I am an alumni of the Grant Writing and Funding Program from 2025, as mentioned earlier. My capstone project, the title is Evaluating Therapeutic Efficacy, Diagnostic Resistance, and Drug Resistance Markers in P. falciparum in Namibia. So this was the title of my capstone project, and I'll share some background. So a previous study found high prevalence of drug resistance markers associated with resistance to the first-line malaria treatment in Namibia. So we made progress in reducing malaria cases with the goal of elimination, but drug resistance threatens the progress that we've made so far. Hence, my project of evaluating treatment efficacy and efficacy of diagnostic tools. So that was just a snapshot of my capstone project, and I'm going to share my experiences, and I'll be very brief. Sharing my experiences and reflections during the grant writing and funding program. So one of the things that made me apply for this program was the desire to articulate the significance of my work. And let's face it, if you cannot show or tell people the importance of your work, it's gonna be very hard to, get funding or create connections. So that's one of the things that made me apply for this. And I mean, Prof. Peter talked about this, that it's important that when you write proposals, it's accessible and understandable to technical and non-technical audiences. So that's one of the strong points that came out for me during this program. I also appreciated the detailed lectures. They were long, but they were very detailed. And we went from proposal development, and Dr. Chao really summarized this process very well. So we also learned about creating transparent budgets, and some of the advice that we got is if you can share quotations from reputable vendors, that is something that can strengthen your proposal. And that was a good tip that I actually got from the program. We also had a lot of assignments, writing proposals. I mean, you can't just sit here and watch people explain these things to you. You have to do it yourself. So we did a lot of writing, going back and forth, getting peer reviews. And we also had to film like 3-minute pitches. I remember getting feedback from the other colleagues saying it was a little bit challenging. It was difficult. Some people preferred to write, but this is why we joined the program, so we can learn how to speak and, get feedback from our peers. So like I said, we provided peer review from the proposal, and this was actually my first time using a rubric. And I learned that a rubric is a selection criteria that is used to assess people's proposals. So that was really exciting for me, that I got to assess other people's proposals using a rubric, and it gave me a perspective of what people look at when they're looking at your proposals. Something else that I really liked was the digital notebook, where we kept our assignments and we used that to actually track our progress. So that was really nice. And one more thing, I really appreciate the Discord community because it allows the people to network and collaborate. I remember one of the colleagues put in a text and said, "I'm doing this. If you'd like to connect, please reach out." I think it's very difficult finding collaborators, but on the Discord community, you can see people's profiles and bios and what they do, and it just makes it really easy to connect with people. So I'd like to leave you with this. Begin with the end in mind. When you get accepted in this program, you should know what you want. What is it that you want to get out of this? So for me, I have a proposal that I can update based on the calls. And at the moment, I'm actually writing a proposal with a couple of collaborators. I feel confident, I feel competent because I've gone through the program, the course. And I actually look forward to keep mobilizing resources for impact. I hope you find this program as enriching and worth your time like I did. And the facilitators, Prof. Eda, Prof. Peter, Prof. Ghana, are very knowledgeable and they're always ready to share their experiences. So I think you can tell from the call how great this program is going to be. So thank you so much and all the best.
Thank you so much, Lydia. And I'll just emphasize two things you mentioned. The importance of making a pitch, right? One of the key parts of this program, as we mentioned today, is research communication or just communication in general. And the more that we can express that in the words that we use, but also in the words that we write, the better we are going to be at being able to communicate to the reviewers and those that we want to network with in the grant writing and funding space. And the other part I'll accentuate is the Discord community. That is a community where the scholars have exclusive access to each other, as well as the professors that are involved in the program, and it becomes a place for folks to network, get to know each other, share ideas, give peer feedback, and you've heard those themes in what Dr. Chao and Lydia mentioned as well. And that's that supportive community element that we really emphasize here in the Institute and in the grant writing and funding program. We're going to now turn to briefly some other elements of the program here, and then we are going to talk about the application a little bit more, in addition to what has already been shared by Dr. Chao in particular in her remarks. So we're going to go there. So I invite you, if you have questions about the grant writing and funding program, as well as the application process, or anything that's in your on your mind, to please share those in the chat. We're going to be answering those as we go along this section, as we start to move towards the end of today's session. So over to you, Prof. Eda.
Yeah, I think that Lydia and Dr. Chao have done a great job telling us about these benefits. I mean, you can see firsthand what the benefits are. They are enormous. So I'm just going to draw our attention to a few, which is advanced competencies in grant writing and management. I think Prof. Jelili mentioned this, that we need those competencies, the use of LaTeX, developing a professional website, and so on, the writing, and so on and so forth. It's really important for grant writing, and these are this is one of the things that the program brings. There is also international networking that comes from the showcases and awards that we have, and recommendation letters. Usually it's one key requirement for grants. And once you become a scholar in any of our programs, just like in the grant writing and funding program, you get the opportunity to get recommendation letters from us when you have such a need. And then personalized mentorship and community that Lydia has alluded to really nicely. We have these different opportunities where you can connect with one another and build teams that will be good. And This comes with lots of access to different opportunities. And the Leaders of Africa Institute in itself provides a platform where you can be able to present your work. And we have several such works that have been presented in the past. So we have the Leaders of Africa Institute presents, and you will see different works like during the COVID-19 period, the different works that were presented during that period. And our scholars have that opportunity if they want to present their work on these different platforms to do so. And so I think that we're going to see just samples of that. And as we go forward, it's important to highlight a value-driven approach. This is really important because the grant writing process is not just one where we just put in any kind of proposal and we're interested in funding for personal gain. Yes, you may benefit from payment of your time put in and so on, but it's one that is grounded in ethics, that is grounded in creativity and experimentation, in rigor, in engagement. And so we use a value-driven approach that our scholars commit to, but not just as scholars, also the instructors must use this approach in just whatever that they are doing. And we love to really read out these, to call it out, so that we can be able to imbibe what these values are. So it goes thus: I commit myself to further the cause of equity, justice, and selfless service in my country, the African continent, and globally. I stand unafraid to identify and question anyone engaging in behavior that contributes to inequity and injustice, including corruption and the protection of privilege. I also accept the well-meaning and respectful critique of others to ensure I maintain my commitment to justice and equity despite temptations to do otherwise. I pledge myself to the service of others, regardless of their background, and do all in my power to be a true leader of Africa and the world. So usually in our sessions, we'll get our scholars to affirm this. So this means that when you become a scholar, you have the opportunity to do so. Lots of questions have come in about the scholarship and the whole structure of the grant writing. And I'm going to pass on to Prof. Peter to tell us about that.
And just to emphasize, as Prof. Etta said, the Institute puts a big value on the importance of having a moral background to the work that we do, because with knowledge and research and the work that we do comes power, and we need to use that power effectively and for good ends. And that's why the administration, the facilitators, the program leads, including the research and grant writing scholars, affirm the Leaders of Africa pledge that Prof. Etta has nicely read for us. Now, one of the other aspects of the application process is the impact scholarships. Everyone who is accepted to the program is reviewed for an impact scholarship, and that happens at the same time. Now, many of you have applied to different opportunities where you apply for admission and then you also apply separately for the scholarship. The way in which the admissions process works in the grant writing and funding program is that the scholarship and acceptance are determined at the very same time. And everyone who is given acceptance to the grant writing and funding program receives an impact scholarship in support of their tuition for the program. The impact scholarships cover about 90 to 95% of the $3,500 tuition. So what that amounts to in terms of those who are accepted, it ranges depending on the size of that scholarship, but it's between about $250 and $350 US thereabouts. So it's somewhere in that range. The rest is supported by scholarships by the Leaders of Africa Institute and our development partners. And again, there is no separate application for that funding, for that element of funding. That is something that is determined on the basis, and everyone who's accepted to the cohort receives that scholarship or a scholarship in that line. So that's a key part to note here. The other thing I will note is that since this is funding on behalf of the tuition, it becomes yet another opportunity for you to share on your resume or on your CV that you have been able to be successful in getting this level of funding to participate in the grant writing and funding program, which again, as we talked about today, showing success in being able to receive scholarships or receive grants is critical to funders as well. In addition to that, for those of us that do not receive admission to the full grant writing and funding program, there will be another competitive process that happens, which is for the workshops and short courses that the Institute provides. And those this year are fully funded. So that may be a grant writing and funding one-day workshop, for instance. So there is a one-day workshop that brings together folks that may not have gathered acceptance to the grant writing and funding program, but we believe with some support this year that they'll be ready for that program in the future or the near future. And so this is an encouragement for you to apply, because just because you may not receive acceptance to the grant writing and funding program in this cycle, this becomes a stepping stone for your acceptance into that full program at a later date. And these opportunities are, in fact, fully funded, the one-day grant writing and funding workshop. So we use this as an important tool, and we use this as a way of accelerating those who applied to the program that, again, will be prepared for the program in the near future. Even if you haven't been accepted the program in the past, you are welcome to apply again as well. We encourage you to. And if you've already applied before today's session, and you're hearing today's session and you're understanding more about the program and want to update your application, we invite you to put a new application in. The admissions committee is only going to review the most recent submission that you had for your application. So that's a question we always received, and we've already received it in the chat, was, can I update my application? So you'll have to do a new application, but you can certainly submit that later, and the most recent application will be shared. Now, all of today's session is being recorded, and a recording will be shared with you within the next couple of days. So a lot of you asked for the content for today's session and want to be able to review it. A link in the recording, as well as materials and some general information for the application process, will be shared with you in one email that will be shared by Friday or Monday of next week. And I think one of the key things that you'll want to reflect on is the application process. The deadline is in about 4 weeks from now. So that is March 6th. So there's plenty of time to apply. It begins with some contact information about you. So how can we get in touch with you? Make sure you share an email that you will have perpetual access to. One of the mistakes that some folks make is they use an academic or other email, and they somehow lose access to that email somewhere along the way. And so it's hard for us to be able to reach out with you with your decision. So please make sure that contact information is up to date and one that you will always have access to. Then you will submit a CV or resume, which is going to give your educational and your work journey. And so that will be shared on that space. And then the critical component that Dr. Chao mentioned is the statement of interest. And you should answer in 500 words or less the following questions. What are your research and thematic and professional interests? What shaped your interest in research and social innovation? What do you hope to learn from the grant writing and funding program at the Leaders of Africa Institute? What is your experience applying for research, funding, and grants? What successes have you had? What challenges have you faced? If you do not have experience, feel free to share this. And how will this program help you meet and achieve your career and educational goals? Now, as we talked about earlier in today's session, AI can be very helpful in helping us think through some of the things that we may want to say on a grant or funding related application. But the problem with it is we oftentimes sound all alike. So I want to encourage you, if you are using AI or other tools in crafting or dealing with this statement, to help that at the brainstorming stage, because one of the mistakes that applicants oftentimes make is they over rely on this, and what doesn't come through is who they are as a unique person, as a unique researcher, as a unique entrepreneur, as a unique social innovator. And that's something, unfortunately, AI is not going to be able to capture. Only you can explain that. And that's what the admissions committee is looking for. And then finally, there are some supplementary questions about access to a computer, access to internet access, things of this nature. There is a question that talks about the impact scholarship in the fee. There is no determination that is made, so that there are questions that are purely informational that don't impact your determination. So any answer that you have about your ability to afford the program or the scholarship or anything like that is not taken into account when the admissions committee reviews your application. It is solely based on the merit and the fit that this program has for you, and that. And so that is the process. The decisions will be rendered a number of weeks afterwards, and the program begins at the end of April. There, about mid to late April is when the cohort begins, and it continues through middle of June with some mentorship and other engagements that happen even after the core curriculum has finished in that June period as well. So that's the application process and form. I'm going to pull up the application window as well as share the chat. So we invite you to join and connect with the Leaders of Africa Institute and these channels. And I'm also going to share my personal link, LinkedIn, if you are just simply interested in connecting with myself as the director of the Institute. I will share that there. But let me share the website for the Leaders of Africa Institute and how you navigate that as well. So here is the Leaders of Africa Institute's website. If you go to programs or directly the link that we shared there, you will see that there is the grant writing and funding program, as well as the other 3 major flagship programs, right? So there are 4 major flagship programs, grant writing and funding being one of them, right? So if we click right here, you're going to be able to download the official guide for the program. This is a PDF that explains a little bit more, and this will be attached to the memo that is shared after today's session alongside the recording. And then you are also going to see the application portal here. There's a button right here, and as well as a button at the very bottom here. And this will open it up in a separate window. And this is what the admissions portal looks like. And so you'll be able to fill out the first part, and you'll be able to save and resume your work. If you click save and resume, you're able to email it to yourself or simply save the link. Now, if you lose the link or you lose the email or you forgot to save your progress, then we invite you to just craft a new application. Again, only completed application, and your most recent application is reviewed by the admissions committee. So that's an important thing to mention. So all the uploads are done here. All of the information is shared here. If you are having trouble, and we have some understanding that in some countries like Tanzania, due to government tinkering with the internet and other things like that, it can be sometimes difficult to access the form. In those cases, then you can use a VPN to be able to access those forms as well. But for most of us, we're going to have no trouble accessing the admission portal. So that is what we would say there for that. Again, eligibility is open, right? So there are no age or gender or geographical constraints. We rely on our admissions committee to carefully review applications and make decisions for what is the best fit for the applicant at that present time when it comes to their resource mobilization journey. So with that, I want to see if there are any questions. And then we're going to do kind of like a mini lesson for us as we begin here. Is there a WhatsApp group for applicants? There is no WhatsApp group for applicants of this program, but there is the Leaders of Africa WhatsApp groups. There are 6 presently or 7 presently of these. If you are a member of them, which I assume many of you are already members, that's where you get notifications for events like this, applications opening, or other opportunities at the Institute as well. So we invite you to join those as well. And the Institute can be accessed across all social media platforms mainly, and we recommend LinkedIn in particular amongst those. Let me see if there are any questions here that we did not cover, and feel free to share your questions. Can people who didn't join this meeting still apply? Absolutely. Yes. It is not a requirement to join this information session to apply. It is not considered in the application process that you are here. We rely on these information sessions because we want to see the best applicants obviously apply for the programs, and we also want to encourage folks to be able to apply and have the full knowledge of the program when they do apply. And so that's why we have information sessions. There is this one that we are holding today, and the same information session will be offered in 2 weeks' time in case some of you join late and would like to join the live session later this month. Do you have to be affiliated with a university or research institute? You do not. You do not. One place on the application, they do tell you where you're applying from, and we get folks who applied from major international organizations, WHO, international organizations, also media organizations, other spaces as well. So we see quite a wide range of where people are affiliated from, and those unique experiences as they're relevant to resource mobilization is really what we're looking at when the admissions committee meets and shares that. All right, I want to end today's session. We have about 10 minutes left until we're going to conclude today's session with just a brief conversation about grant writing and funding. One of the key things that we want to encourage you to do and begin to do is to begin to explore the opportunities that are out there for grant writing and funding. And one of the things that we encourage you to do is begin to take a look at the different databases that are shared for research funding. Because one of the key first parts of the grant writing funding program is what Prof. Ghana talked about earlier, which is assessing the grants that we apply for. There are many different opportunities that are out there, and one of the things that we have to acknowledge is our time and our energies are limited, and we don't want to be applying to just every opportunity under the sun. So one of the things that I want to encourage you to do as we leave today's session and we begin to think about this journey is think about how you're assessing the opportunities that are out there. Go try one of these databases, such as the Grant Forward database, or sign up for Google Alerts as one way of getting opportunities shared with you. Look at those opportunities. And one of the things that I want you to do when you look at an opportunity that you find on these databases is try and craft a rubric, right? One of the things that we talk about in the program a lot, and we've talked about a lot over the last couple hours, is the importance of thinking like the reviewer, thinking like the people who are going to actually review that application. And so one of the things I want to challenge you to do as you leave this session is, in addition to be searching for grant opportunities that are out there, find a grant opportunity that fits for you and what you're trying to do, or a funding opportunity from the variety of stakeholders we talked about earlier, and then try and craft a rubric that could be used. And create a rubric, create perhaps 5 different criteria that you would imagine a reviewer is going to use to gauge that funding proposal, and how you would score each of those different sections. When you think backwards, or you think with the end in mind, to use the comments that were mentioned from our scholars who are here today, that's when we begin to think about how we craft that grant proposal and funding proposal in the best and most comprehensive way. So I want to challenge you to think about that as we leave today's session. And so with that, I'm going to pass it back to Prof. Etta to say a few words as we close out today's session.
I really just want to thank our participants who have been here today, and to encourage us all to make a solid application, because entry into the program is competitive. And so if our applications are not of good quality, then we will not be able to gain entry into the opportunities and benefits that are there. It has been an exciting time spent with you. Thank you, and looking forward to those great applications.
With that, I want to thank you all for joining the Grant Writing and Funding Program Information and Workshop session. We encourage you again to apply to the program. We want you to leave this program feeling encouraged about your prospects and the support that the Leaders of Africa Institute can have for you and your research and professional journey. Many of the times when it comes to applying for grants, or applying perhaps for this program, we think about ourselves and we think, can I actually succeed in this process? And one of the things that sometimes deters us from doing is taking a chance and providing that opportunity to be assessed and for us to be seen in these processes. So I want to encourage you to move beyond some of the doubt that you might have about your success in the process, to put in that application and allow the Institute to respond with our feedback and respond in a way that will connect you to the opportunities that it's going to leverage and up your game when it comes to resource mobilization. So again, I want to thank you all for joining us today within the Zoom room, as well as our stream on YouTube as well. I want to encourage you to continue to connect with the Leaders of Africa Institute. We look forward to reading your application and seeing you soon. Take care and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.